A Harley lay on its side on a stormy night along an empty road. The man known in town for being aggressive was lying unconscious in the freezing rain. Dozens of cars passed by, not one of them stopping. But then, an old Ford braked hard. A woman in greasy work clothes stepped out, a single mother and mechanic struggling daily to get by. Still, she knelt beside the man everyone feared, checking his breath. "Hold on," she whispered. That small act of kindness would change not only one man's life, but the entire town of Maple Hollow. Rebecca Lawson lived on the edge of Maple Hollow, in an old house with a leaky roof and peeling walls. She was 35, raising her little daughter Hannah on her own. She worked fixing cars in a makeshift garage daily and worked odd jobs to earn more. The money was just enough to cover the stack of bills. Even so, Rebecca never let her daughter feel unloved. Hannah often asked, "Mom, why is life always so hard for us?" Rebecca only smiled and said, "Because we still have each other. As long as we believe and do what's right, things will be okay." For her, faith wasn't about empty words, but about action. She would repair a struggling single mother's car for free, or share the only loaf of bread in her house with a homeless man outside the grocery store. To her neighbors, Rebecca seemed unusual. Tom, the man next door, once mocked her. "Does believing in God pay your electric bill?" But a few days later, he quietly brought her an old toolbox after seeing her fix a stranger's car for free. Rebecca's actions often made people rethink, even those who claimed not to believe in anything. On the other hand, Caleb was a name that kept the town on edge. He led a biker group, often roaring down the streets and picking fights in bars. People called him the troublemaker, and parents warned their kids to stay far away from the sound of his engines. Caleb didn't care about anyone's opinion. He drank, fought, and believed that survival was the only way. Rebecca had seen Caleb's gang ride past before, but had never spoken to him. In her heart, she believed anyone could change, no matter how far gone. But she didn't know that one stormy night would bring her and Caleb together in a way no one could have imagined. That night, Rebecca drove her old Ford home after a late shift. Rain poured like a waterfall, and the wipers couldn't clear the windshield fast enough. When lightning flashed, she saw a Harley tipped over on the roadside, its rider still in the rain. Dozens of cars went by, their taillights vanishing into the dark. Rebecca slowed down. A question echoed in her chest. Who will save him if I pass him by? She stopped the car, stepping out, her jacket soaked through, her shoes sinking in the mud. The man on the ground was Caleb, his face pale, his breathing uneven. Rebecca knelt down, placing her hand on his chest. She didn't think about his past or the danger. Only one thought filled her mind. This was a human being who needed help. The rain kept falling harder. Rebecca knelt down, her hand trembling as she held it near Caleb's mouth. He was still breathing, but weakly. She quickly removed the cracked helmet, tilted his head to the side so he wouldn't choke. Blood mixed with mud ran down his face. Rebecca pulled a small cloth from her jacket pocket and pressed it against the wound to slow the bleeding. In the lightning's flash, Caleb's face was clear. Yes, it was the man the whole town feared. But now he wasn't the biker leader everyone whispered about. He was just a helpless man lying on the road. Rebecca deeply breathed and whispered, "You'll make it." She didn't know if he could hear, but the words steadied her hands. After giving first aid, Rebecca turned to the Harley. She checked quickly. The wires were soaked, and the gas tank leaked. Exhausted, she still pulled her worn toolkit from the Ford's trunk. Her hands, covered in oil and mud, moved precisely as in the garage. The metal was icy cold, rainwater streaming between her fingers, but she didn't stop. Caleb groaned. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy and confused. For a brief moment, their eyes met. He saw a small woman, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes bright in the storm. No judgment, no contempt, only determination. Rebecca tightened the last bolt and reconnected the wires. She hit the starter. The Harley shook, coughed, then roared to life, its engine booming at night. Rebecca let out a shaky breath, placing her hand on the tank. "Come on, don't give up." Caleb forced himself to sit up, leaning against the bike. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes now held something new. Surprise. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse sound came out. Rebecca gently shook her head, signaling for him to save his strength. She took off her jacket and draped it over his shoulders to keep him warm. Then she waved down a passing truck, asking the driver to help bring Caleb back to town. The man hesitated when he recognized who Caleb was, but Rebecca's steady gaze made him agree. As the truck began to roll away, Caleb turned his head. Through the curtain of rain, he saw Rebecca still standing there, drenched, one hand over her chest, as if silently hoping he would survive. A strange feeling rose inside him. For the first time in years, he didn't see scorn in someone's eyes, but compassion. The storm carried on, but something small had begun to change inside him. The next morning, Caleb woke up in the small wooden house where he and his biker crew usually gathered. His head still throbbed, the wound on his forehead loosely wrapped with a cloth already stained with blood. The sound of last night's rain still seemed to echo in his ears, but what stayed with him most was the memory of the woman's eyes. Eyes without fear, without judgment. He sat up and reached for his old leather wallet. Inside was a faded photograph. He and his older brother sat on a rusty Harley, smiling, brightly. The image pulled Caleb back to years ago. On another rainy night, he had watched his brother get stabbed during a fight with a rival gang. Caleb held him in the rain, but couldn't save him. His brother's last words still rang out, "You must be strong." From then on, Caleb lived as if carrying a burden. To him, being strong meant never letting anyone look down on him, being tough, making the whole town afraid. He drank, fought, rode recklessly, all of it to cover the guilt. But now that memory mixed with the whisper from the stormy night. "You'll make it." Rebecca's voice echoed, making him question whether being strong meant being angry. Caleb put on his leather jacket that afternoon and stepped into the familiar bar. Loud music, heavy smoke, the same faces waiting for him to stir up trouble. A drunk bumped his shoulder, provoking him. Caleb clenched his fist, instinct ready to strike. But then, he stopped. The image of Rebecca kneeling in the rain appeared in his mind, along with the sound of the Harley's engine coming back to life under her hands. Caleb exhaled hard, released the drunk, and quietly left the bar. Surprised eyes followed him. That night, he sat alone in the wooden house, the bottle of whiskey still full. He stared at the photo of his brother, his eyes wet. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. The next day, walking along a small street, Caleb saw a boy struggling with a broken bike chain. The boy looked at him in fear, ready to push the bike away. Caleb stopped, knelt down, and awkwardly fixed the chain. The bike rolled again. The boy looked at him with wide eyes, not just fear, but surprise. In that moment, Caleb felt his heart soften. Rumors spread quickly through the town. Caleb wasn't as violent as before, but people still scoffed. An old wolf will always be a wolf. Only Rebecca smiled quietly when she heard the story at the market. Deep inside, she knew the seed had been planted, and with time it would grow. Days passed, and Rebecca kept busy in her shabby garage. She took any job she could: oil changes, brake repairs, patching tires. The money was little, never enough to cover all the bills. On the kitchen table, the notice still sat, bold red letters reading, "Payment due in 7 days, or the property will be seized." While Rebecca was working on an old pickup truck one afternoon, 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't waste words, only handed her another paper and said coldly, "You have 1 week. If you don't pay, this house and land will be ours." Hannah stood in the corner of the garage, her face pale. Rebecca nodded, not arguing. When they left, she sat on a wooden chair, sweat and dust clinging to her face. Her hand holding the paper trembled, but her eyes did not shed tears. She thought of her daughter and the prayer she whispered every night. "Give me the strength to stand, even when there's no way out." Meanwhile, Caleb continued to fight with himself. The rumor about him helping the boy with the bike had spread, making many in the biker gang laugh at him. One evening, Caleb walked into the bar and heard Jake, his right-hand man, roar, "Word is you're a hero now? Helping kids, huh?" The whole gang roared with laughter. Caleb clenched his fists but held back. He drained his glass, then walked out without a word. That night, he sat alone in the wooden house, pulling out the photo of his brother. The image of Rebecca in the rain came back with her gentle voice. He remembered the helpless moment when his brother collapsed in his arms and his chest tightened. Maybe Rebecca was right. Strength wasn't about anger, but the courage to stay when someone needed help. In town, people kept talking. At the grocery store, Martha whispered, "That girl Rebecca is about to lose her home." Another added, "Maybe that's the price of always helping others." But that evening, Martha saw Rebecca repairing a car for a struggling single mother who couldn't pay. Martha stood silently, and then the next morning, she brought a basket of apples to Rebecca's door and said softly, "I used to think you were foolish. Maybe I was wrong." Rebecca smiled gently, thanking her, but the weight didn't lift. The deadline was only days away. She knew her faith and kindness would face the most challenging test this time. Across town, Caleb stood before his biker crew, his chest heavy. He was ready to change. But the biggest question remained. Would his crew and the whole community accept the new path he was trying to take? The deadline day arrived. The sky was gray, and the wind rushed through the empty street. Rebecca woke early, looking around her small, familiar home. Every wall, every wooden board carried memories of her and her daughter. Today, all of it could be lost. On the table lay the debt notice. Rebecca folded it and hid it in a drawer, not wanting Hannah to see it. She hurried to pour a cup of weak coffee, but her hands shook so badly that it spilt across the table. Hannah came out, holding her blanket, and asked softly, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Rebecca smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's hair. "As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." But even she wasn't sure. By noon, the 2 men in dark suits returned while Rebecca was working on a customer's truck. They walked straight into the garage, voices cold. "Time's up. This house and land are ours now." They pulled out red paint and slashed a significant mark across the wooden door, a seizure notice. The sound of the brush tore through the air. Inside, Hannah clutched her teddy bear, eyes wide with fear. Neighbors peeked from a distance, whispering, "It's over. She's really lost everything." Rebecca stood still, her hands clenched until they turned white. She wanted to resist, but her pockets were empty. She drew a deep breath, whispering silently, "Give me strength so I won't collapse." At that moment, another sound rose. At first, a low rumble, then louder and louder, engines thundering, shaking the ground. Dozens of Harleys lined up at the end of the road and rolled into town. People panicked, slamming their doors shut, hearts pounding. Everyone thought it was the start of chaos. Rebecca held Hannah close and stepped onto the porch. The bikers stopped in front of the garage, engines roaring like thunder. The tension was suffocating. Caleb stepped off his bike, his face still scarred and hardened, but his eyes no longer filled with anger. He looked straight at the red notice, tore it apart in front of everyone, then dropped to one knee, holding up a red and white cloth, a keepsake from his late brother. "That stormy night you saved me. No one else. From today, you're not alone anymore." The entire biker crew removed their helmets and bowed their heads in silence. Neighbors behind curtains covered their mouths, unable to believe what they saw. The man who once spread fear now kneeling before a small woman. Rebecca hugged Hannah tightly. Her heart trembled, but the despair in her chest faded for the first time in many days, replaced by a spark of hope. The engines went silent, leaving behind a heavy stillness. Caleb remained kneeling on the porch, holding the red and white cloth to Rebecca. But behind him, a harsh voice rang out. "Why are we doing this? She's not one of us." It was Jake, the big biker with tattooed arms, Caleb's right-hand man for years. He threw his helmet to the ground, his face flushed. A few others nodded in agreement, their eyes wavering. The air grew tense like a fuse ready to ignite. Rebecca froze, clutching Hannah to her chest. She knew one wrong move could turn this into chaos. Caleb slowly stood, facing Jake. His voice was deep but steady. "You're right. Rebecca isn't part of the gang. But that night, when I lay in the rain, everyone turned their back. Only she stopped." Jake growled, "One prayer, one bike fix, and now you want us to change everything?" Caleb stepped closer, his gaze locked on Jake's. "It's not about the bike. It's because she saw the human in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. If you had been in my place that night, you'd understand." The crew fell silent. A few lowered their heads, remembering Caleb being brought back that stormy night, soaked and beaten. Caleb continued firmly, "We swore never to leave a brother behind when he's down. That night, I was the one down, and she saved me when no one else would." Jake clenched his fists. For a moment, it looked like he would throw a punch, but his eyes wavered, and finally, he lowered his hand. He bent to pick up his helmet and muttered through gritted teeth, "Fine. I don't like it, but I won't walk away." The tension eased. One by one, the others bowed their heads and went back to work. Rebecca let out a long breath, her heart still pounding. Caleb turned back to her, his eyes softer now. "You gave me a reason to stand up. Now it's our turn to stand with you." Rebecca gripped the cloth tightly, unable to speak. At that moment, she realized the change wasn't only Caleb's, an entire crew stepping out of the shadows. The neighbors around stood quietly. Martha, the grocery store owner, whispered to the person beside her, "Maybe we were wrong, thinking they only knew how to destroy." And from his window, Tom looked out, his eyes no longer skeptical, but carrying a hint of respect. Tonight, It wasn't only Caleb choosing to rise. The whole town witnessed a turning point, born from the small act of a mechanic who refused to walk away. The next morning, Maple Hollow was buzzing again. People still couldn't stop talking about the sight from last night. The entire biker crew lined up in front of Rebecca's garage, their leader kneeling to hand over a keepsake. Some remained doubtful, but for others, it was the first time they felt a spark of hope. By noon, the sound of engines filled the air again. But this time, behind the Harleys weren't bottles or noise. Stacks of lumber, bags of cement, cans of paint, and tools. The convoy stopped right in front of Rebecca's yard. Caleb stepped down, his voice firm and clear. Today, we're rebuilding her garage. Not because of debt, but because she helped me when the whole world walked away. Rebecca froze, her hand still clutching the old cloth. Hannah peeked out from behind her mother, her eyes wide with surprise. Neighbors gathered at the fence, whispering cautiously at first, but soon stayed to watch. The tattooed, broad-shouldered bikers began unloading the materials. They split into groups, some measuring wood, some mixing cement, and others digging foundations. The sounds of hammers and saws echoed through the street. Hands once used for fists now patiently drove nails. Not everyone was cheerful. Jake, the one who had opposed the night before, still scowled, working roughly. However, as time passed, when Hannah came out with cups of lemonade for each man, he even gave a slight nod as he accepted. A faint smile flickered across his tattooed face. The grocery store owner, Martha, stepped forward, placing a basket of red apples on the table. I once said bikers only knew how to destroy. Maybe I was wrong. Rebecca looked at her, too moved to speak. Joe, the truck driver who had been once harassed by the gang, was the first to clap when the garage frame rose. The applause spread, pulling more and more people in. The heavy air of the town began to lift. By evening, the new garage frame stood tall. The bikers were drenched in sweat, but their eyes shone with pride. Caleb handed Rebecca a shiny set of keys. This isn't pity. This is thanks. This garage belongs to you. Rebecca accepted them, her hand trembling. At that moment, she realized that her prayers and small acts of kindness had started a bigger change than she had ever imagined. Applause rang across the yard. Neighbors, bikers, even those who once doubted, now shared the same joy. Rebecca looked around. Eyes that once held suspicion now carried respect. Hannah hugged her tightly and whispered, "Mom, our garage is so beautiful." It was the moment Rebecca understood. She didn't just gain a new garage, she gained a new community. In the days that followed, Maple Hollow was no longer the same. People who once shut their doors at the sound of engines now stood on their porches, nodding as the bikers rode by. Martha's grocery store grew livelier, as she loved to tell customers the story of Caleb and his crew rebuilding Rebecca's garage. Folks no longer spoke only of a gang of troublemakers, but began calling them the ones who did the right thing. Rebecca's new garage glowed with light from morning until night. Customers came not only for repairs, but out of curiosity, and stayed because of her sincerity. Rebecca worked diligently, and Hannah helped with small tasks, passing wrenches, wiping hands, pouring drinks. On the wall, Rebecca hung the red and white cloth Caleb had given her. It became a symbol, reminding everyone that even the most lost souls could be saved when shown kindness. One afternoon, Caleb came alone, without the crew. He sat on the wooden chair in front of the garage, watching Rebecca bend over an old motorcycle. His voice was low but steady. "I used to think being strong meant making the whole town fear me." But that night, when you knelt and saved me, I realized real strength is having the courage to change." Rebecca looked up, smiling gently, her eyes calm yet firm. She didn't need to say much. For Caleb, that look was enough. In town, others were changing too. Martha brought apples regularly, partly to say thank you and to talk. Joe often stopped by the garage, offering to haul supplies with his truck. Even Tom, the skeptical neighbor, showed up with an old toolbox one evening. He handed it over and said, "I don't believe in God, but I believe you're doing the right thing." Hannah added more drawings to the wall, pictures of her mom, the garage, and a line of Harleys riding under a blue sky. Everyone who walked in stopped to look, then smiled. The garage carried the smell of oil and grease and the scent of trust and connection. One night, Rebecca sat on the porch, gazing at a sky full of stars. Hannah leaned against her shoulder, already asleep. Caleb sat nearby, quiet. The three of them stayed silent, but it was a warm silence, proof that a new community was forming. Rebecca thought to herself, "I'm not just fixing machines. I'm helping fix the faith of an entire town." If you believe that kindness can change even the hardest hearts, join us in sharing stories like this at Humankind Stories. Subscribe, share, and help keep the flame of compassion alive.